She pulled away. Now you're thinking of chasing. Your phone's in your hand, scrolling, hesitating, second-guessing everything. You wonder if blocking her will make her notice. Or maybe if you send one last message, the one where you pour your heart out, maybe she'll come back. But what if I told you? The only move that truly flips the game is no move at all. Modern relationships have twisted our sense of power. You've been taught to over-communicate, to prove your worth, to be emotional on demand. But every time you try to explain yourself to someone who already made up their mind, you lose leverage. You give her the pen to write your story. Comment, "I'm done proving myself," if you've ever felt like you're the only one showing up in the relationship. This isn't just about a breakup. This is about reclaiming your life, your peace, your value. Because when you stop reacting and start becoming, she'll feel it deeply, and it'll haunt her more than any argument ever could. Number 1, your calm exposes her games. She doesn't expect you to stay calm because she's used to men unraveling, and when you don't unravel, it dismantles the whole script she's built in her mind, where she imagines herself as the one with emotional control, holding the power, knowing that no matter how far she pushes, you'll still chase, still explain, still try to get her back. But when you do none of those things, when you simply remain composed, when you don't seek revenge, when you don't ask questions, when you don't beg for closure, it doesn't just confuse her, it confronts her with a reality she can't deny. That her actions actually had consequences this time, that she actually lost something real, that the man she took for granted is no longer emotionally available to be manipulated, and your calm presence, your unwavering peace, it becomes a mirror that reflects all the ways she mistreated you, all the moments you tolerated things you shouldn't have. And instead of seeing you react, she's forced to sit with herself, to notice the stillness not just as emptiness, but as evidence that she never really knew you, never really understood your value. And what's even more disruptive is that your calm is consistent. It's not for show. It's not temporary. It's who you are now. And as the days go by and she realizes that you're no longer accessible, that you're not orbiting around her anymore, that you're not sending subtle signals or posting to get her attention, that's when her mind spirals, because she realizes you're gone. Not physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You've exited, and in your absence, she meets the version of herself she never wanted to see, the one that no longer has power. And while you're growing, investing in yourself, getting stronger, more focused, more grounded, she's stuck watching, confused by her own emptiness, wondering why the same tricks don't work anymore, wondering if she ever really had you at all. And when she finally dares to reach out, testing the waters, trying to see if the old version of you still exists, your calm response, or your lack of response, is the final confirmation that you've evolved beyond her reach, that you're not bitter, just done, and that she doesn't have the keys to unlock who you've become. And now that you've disconnected emotionally, your clarity becomes a sword that cuts through every lie she believed, every power play she thought she won, because now she realizes she wasn't in control, she was just loud, and your calm was never weakness. It was your awakening, your strategy, your protection. And from this place of grounded power, you no longer crave her recognition, you no longer seek her apology, because you understand that closure doesn't come from her, it comes from the man who outgrows the game entirely. And as you continue building a life that no longer makes room for her chaos, your peace becomes permanent, and her regret becomes punishment, not because you wanted to hurt her, but because healing yourself became the lesson she was never prepared to learn. And as her illusions collapse under the weight of your calm, you realize you never needed to raise your voice to reclaim your value. You just needed to understand your own worth deeply. That's why the Stoic relationship blueprint exists. It's not just a book, it's your guide, your anchor, your silent weapon in a world that keeps demanding your attention while giving you none in return. If you've ever asked yourself why you keep getting taken for granted, why your silence shakes them more than your words ever did, or how to stop being the one who cares more, this book holds every answer. You won't have to keep searching for clarity again. Once it's yours for life. Accessible whenever you need strength, clarity, or a reminder of who you really are. The link is waiting in the comments. Grab it, change your story, and carry this wisdom with you forever. Number 2. When you don't chase, she questions everything. She expects you to chase because that's what most men do when they feel rejected. They pursue harder, they double text, they show up uninvited, they make themselves available even when they're being emotionally discarded. But when you don't chase, when you don't try to fix what she broke, when you don't entertain her breadcrumbs or fall into the trap of proving your worth, something in her mind begins to shift, because now she's forced to question everything she assumed about your attachment to her. And it's that shift, that unexpected absence of neediness, that starts to unravel the confidence she had in her ability to keep you tethered to her emotional playground, because now, instead of watching you beg, she watches you vanish, not in bitterness, not in rage, but in focus, in transformation, in silence. And this confuses her because most men can't handle detachment. Most men reach back out when their ego is bruised, but you're not reaching out. You're not giving her signs. You're not doing anything that gives her emotional reassurance that she still has you. And this lack of validation creates a gap in her mind that becomes louder by the day. And as she checks her phone, wondering why there's no message from you, as she refreshes her feed, hoping to see something that confirms you're still in orbit, she starts to panic. Not because she loves you, but because she's losing control. And it's in that loss of control that she begins to reflect, to rewind, to obsess over the moments she dismissed you, devalued you, disregarded your loyalty, and now that you're not there to be the emotional crutch, to absorb her indecision and validate her worth, she starts to spiral. And the irony is, she thought you'd chase. She thought her silence would bait you, but your silence, your withdrawal, it flipped the script, it turned the mirror around, and now she's left wondering how she lost a man who used to move mountains just to keep the connection alive. And that wondering becomes torture, because it forces her to realize that you didn't just stop chasing. You stopped needing her validation altogether. And in that moment, she learns a truth most women never confront. That men who stop chasing don't disappear because they're hurt. They disappear because they've finally seen the game for what it is, and they choose to no longer play it. And the most dangerous kind of man is the one who builds something beautiful in the silence where she thought she broke him, because that man becomes untouchable, not because he hides, but because he rises. And now, every time she remembers you, she doesn't remember a man who begged. She remembers a man who vanished in peace, who created so much distance that even her curiosity can't bridge the gap. And by the time she realizes what she lost, you're already too far ahead, too focused, too self-aware to ever look back. And she finally sees the truth, that she was never worth chasing in the first place, because the version of you who would have chased no longer exists. Number 3. Your absence creates her obsession. When you were always available, she took you for granted, because women don't obsess over what's guaranteed. They obsess over what suddenly vanishes without explanation, without closure, without a scene. And that's why your absence becomes the very thing that haunts her more than any emotional plea ever could. Because now that she doesn't have access to your attention, to your validation, to your presence, her mind becomes the battlefield. And unlike before, when you were constantly responding to her texts, validating her posts, replying to her drama, now you give her nothing. Not anger, not attention, not even curiosity. And this lack of reaction, this vacuum, this void where she once found her supply, it forces her to start obsessing. because now she's no longer sure where she stands, no longer sure if she still has you emotionally, no longer sure if you still think of her. And it's that uncertainty that drives her insane, because in her world, attention equals value. And without your presence to remind her that she's still relevant in your life, she begins spiraling into obsession, checking your social media, over-analyzing your silence, trying to decode whether or not you're truly gone. And every time she fails to get a reaction out of you, it confirms what she fears the most, that she's lost the control she once had over your mind. And this is why men who vanish without announcing it always come back as ghosts in her conscience. Because you're not angry, you're not vengeful, you're just gone. And now she's addicted to the questions that will never be answered, addicted to the regret that keeps her awake at night, addicted to the thought that maybe, just maybe, you've replaced her, forgotten her, healed beyond her. And this is why you never need to argue, never need to block, never need to explain, because your absence is the explanation, and it speaks louder than anything you could say. Because when a man walks away without burning the bridge, but also without ever looking back, he becomes unforgettable, not because he left a mark, but because he left a void that no one else can fill. And that void becomes a prison for the woman who thought she could always come back, who thought you'd always be there. And now she's forced to live with the version of herself that can't access you anymore, that can't reach you, that can't read your thoughts. And your silence becomes her obsession, because it reminds her every day that she had something real and lost it to her own games. And by the time she's ready to apologize, to explain, to come clean, it's already too late, because you're not interested in rewinding what you've already grown beyond. Number 4. No response equals full control. You don't need to explain, defend, or justify your silence to anyone, especially not to a woman who only values you when you're reactive, because the moment you realize that your silence is not passive but strategic, it becomes the strongest weapon you have, not to manipulate, but to disengage from a game you no longer want to play. And while she's waiting for your response, for a reaction, for validation that she still matters, you've already stepped out of the frame. And what's powerful is that you do so not out of spite, but out of clarity, because now you see things for what they are. You understand that attention is currency, and when you stop spending it on someone who never valued it, you begin accumulating power, inner power, the kind of grounded composure that doesn't flinch, doesn't react, doesn't chase. And this is where everything starts to flip, because when she no longer receives the emotional feedback she's accustomed to, when her bait is ignored, when her tantrums are met with silence, she begins to feel the imbalance. And for the first time, she starts to realize that your validation wasn't cheap, it was precious. And now that it's gone, she wants it more than ever, and yet you give her nothing, not to punish, but because you've outgrown the need to explain yourself to people who once dismissed your worth. And the beauty of this control is that it's quiet, it's unseen, it doesn't announce itself, but it shifts the dynamic entirely, because now you're not fighting for a seat at a table that never honored you. Now you're building your own table, focused on your mission, grounded in your growth. And every time you don't respond, every time you let her wonder, every time you remain stoic in the face of her emotional noise, you take back your power piece by piece, and eventually she begins to sense it, even if she doesn't understand it. Because the energy you once gave her freely is now invested into your future, into your peace, into becoming the kind of man who no longer entertains what disrespects him. And the deeper truth is this: no response doesn't mean you're afraid to engage. It means you've risen above the level where engagement is even necessary. And she realizes your silence isn't a void, it's a decision. Her confusion grows in the emptiness you no longer fill, and what once was a game becomes a lesson, because now she sees that control isn't about dominance, it's about detachment. And in your detachment, You reclaim every ounce of your dignity, your self-worth, your focus, and by the time she's ready to meet you with clarity, you've already moved past the need for closure, because your peace is your answer, and your future no longer includes the drama she brings. Number 5. Stillness kills her ego. Every time you respond, defend, or explain yourself to someone who doesn't respect your presence, you feed their ego, and her ego depends on your emotional engagement. It thrives on your frustration, your pain, your reactions. Because as long as you react, she knows you still care. She knows she still matters. And in her mind, your suffering is proof of her power. So the moment you stop giving her that proof, the moment you go quiet, not cold, not rude, just distant and unfazed, her entire illusion of control begins to crumble. And this is why stillness is not just discipline, it's dominance. Because without your attention, she's forced to look at herself, and she doesn't like what she sees. Because your stillness is not weak, it's reflective, and it reveals the cracks in her confidence, the lies she told herself about how much she meant to you, and the pedestal she placed herself on begins to shake, not because you tried to tear it down, but because you simply walked away without giving her the usual emotional fireworks. And what makes this powerful is that you're not doing it to manipulate. You're doing it because you've matured past the need to argue with someone who enjoys conflict, and that maturity is lethal to a woman who relies on emotional chaos to feel validated. So now when she posts for attention, there's no reply. When she tests your boundaries, there's no reaction. When she pretends to move on, she does it for your eyes, but your eyes are no longer there, and that absence cuts deeper than any insult could, because now she feels unseen by the one who used to see her entirely. And this is what makes her ego implode. Not because you hurt her, but because you stopped entertaining her. And in a world where most men compete for validation, your disinterest is revolutionary. Your refusal to engage becomes her punishment, not because you intended to make her suffer, but because her ego can't survive in silence. And as time goes on and your consistency proves that you're not acting, that you're not waiting in the background hoping for a message, that you've actually elevated to a level where her presence doesn't even register anymore, she begins to spiral inward, comparing herself to the peace you now walk in, realizing she never really had the control she thought she did. And as her ego dies slowly in the silence, your power multiplies, because you're no longer playing the emotional ping-pong match she built her self-worth on, and that is what breaks her more than any closure ever could. Number 6. She waits. You level up. She's not moving on as fast as she pretends to. She's waiting, watching, anticipating that moment you break, that moment you fold and come crawling back, because that's what you've done in the past. And in her mind, you're predictable, you're emotionally dependent, you're someone who always returns, no matter how bad she hurt you, and that false sense of security makes her cocky. It makes her reckless, because she believes she can always pull you back in with just a look, just a post, just a fake apology. And while she's playing this waiting game, assuming that you'll orbit back around her, you're leveling up in silence, upgrading every part of your life without needing to broadcast it. And what makes this transformation hit the hardest is that she expects you to react, but instead you evolve. She expects you to sulk, but instead you train. She expects you to beg, but instead you build. And every time she checks for signs that you're still stuck, still hurting, still reaching, she finds nothing, and that nothing becomes everything, because now she's waiting on a man who's no longer available, not because he blocked her, not because he ghosted, but because he grew, and growth makes you invisible to the people who only knew the broken version of you. So now, while she waits, hoping for a message, you're studying, healing, making money, mastering your body, your emotions, your mind, And that's when she realizes the man she thought she could keep on standby is now the man she can't reach. And what stings more than your silence is your glow-up. The undeniable truth that you no longer seek her validation, that her name no longer occupies your thoughts. And now she has to watch from the outside as you become the man she claimed she always wanted, only you're doing it without her. And that exclusion becomes her torment, because she once had front row seats to your love, and now she's locked out of the stadium, and the game is no longer about her. And that is what destroys her slowly, the fact that you didn't stay stuck, you didn't wait, you didn't collapse, you ascended, and in your ascension, you proved something she never wanted to be true, that you never needed her to begin with. And now she checks your page, still sees nothing. That drives her crazy, because the silence she expected to be temporary has become your new standard. And the man who once made her feel like the center of the universe has become the man whose universe no longer includes her name. Number 7. Your growth makes her shrink. Your growth isn't just about self-improvement. It's a declaration, a silent broadcast that says you've stopped making excuses for potential and started becoming everything you pretended not to be just to keep her comfortable. Because while she expected you to stay where she left you, emotionally broken, mentally scattered, waiting for her attention, you decided to level up. And now every inch of progress you make, every pound you lose, every book you finish, every goal you accomplish, makes her feel smaller. Not because you brag, not because you post it, but because you do it quietly, consistently, without including her in the story. And that exclusion burns, because now she has to watch you become the man she always doubted you could be. And the irony is, it wasn't her love that made you grow. It was her absence, her betrayal, her silence that pushed you into your evolution, and this growth becomes her punishment. Not because you want revenge, but because your discipline reminds her of the chaos she brought into your life. And every time she sees you focused, every time she hears about your success, every time she compares you to the new guy she thought would replace you, she feels it in her chest, that she downgraded from a man who used to love her into a man who no longer even notices her existence. And that distance is emotional death to someone who used to feed off your devotion, because now she can't even get a text back, can't even get a reaction, can't even get acknowledgement. And what stings the most is not that you changed, but that you changed without her, that the version of you she always said she wanted finally arrived. And he didn't invite her in, because your new life has no space for people who once preyed on your downfall. And this is what shrinking feels like for her, realizing too late that you were becoming something rare, that the struggle she watched you endure was only the beginning of your transformation. And now she's not just watching a man grow, she's watching a man evolve into someone she no longer qualifies for, someone who no longer entertains inconsistency, someone who found peace and purpose and power in the very void she left behind. And that realization doesn't just hurt, it humbles, because it reminds her that your worth was never about what you had, but what you were becoming. And now that you've become, she sees her mistake in every post she scrolls past, every message you ignore, every win you don't announce but she still hears about, and her ego starts to fold in on itself, because the one man who would have given her everything no longer even offers her his attention. And that silence is louder than any comeback, because it proves that you didn't just survive her absence, you outgrew her entirely. Number 8. Indifference is the final chapter. There's nothing more painful to her than your indifference. Not your anger, not your arguments, not even your absence, because she can explain those things away. She can call you bitter, she can call you emotional, but when you stop feeling altogether, when her name doesn't move your heart or your habits, when you become so grounded in your peace that she no longer even triggers a thought, you become untouchable. And that's the moment she realizes it's over, not because she left, but because you stopped caring. And that indifference isn't something you fake. It's something you earn through heartbreak, through disappointment, through watching someone devalue you while you loved them fully. And now that you've reclaimed your self-worth, now that you no longer derive identity from her presence, she becomes irrelevant. And that is a different kind of heartbreak for her, because she never thought you'd stop chasing, stop wondering, stop watching. But the moment you choose not to respond, not to look back, not to engage, it's like erasing her from the narrative. And for someone who was used to being the center of your emotional world, that removal is soul-crushing. And what she doesn't realize is that indifference doesn't mean you didn't love her. It means you loved yourself more, that after all the tears and confusion and unanswered questions, you found peace not in revenge, not in new women, but in choosing silence over chaos, growth over validation, and presence over proving. And now every time she sees your name, she sees her failure, not because you say it, but because you don't say anything at all. And she realizes that the chapter ended not when she left, but when you stopped trying to bring her back. And that truth sits in her chest like regret with no exit, because deep down, she knows she'll never matter to you the way she once did, not because of something you did, but because of everything she didn't do when she had the chance. And now that you've become indifferent, truly indifferent, not pretending, not acting, but genuinely free from her pull, she understands that she no longer has a role in your story, that your silence isn't a pause, it's a period, and that chapter isn't open for editing anymore. If you're done being the one who always explains, who always forgives, who always waits, the Stoic relationship blueprint is for you. It's not for the man who wants to chase. It's for the one who's ready to never need to again. This isn't just a guide. It's your escape from emotional chaos, the end of begging, overthinking, and trying to prove your worth to someone who never saw it. Comment, "I choose clarity," if you're ready to grab the ebook now. It's linked in the comments, and it's yours forever. Like this video, subscribe and share it if you believe more men deserve to know these truths, because silence is powerful, but shared wisdom saves lives.